In
Live.
5,
In
4,
5.
3, and we're on.
2 architect rationals and a performer artisan. I mean, can
Yeah.
you believe it?
And the performer's the one that's not on camera. It's like it's opposite day. But that's the thing is we're pickier. Like, the architects, the rationals can be on camera and not even acknowledge the camera's there.
Right.
2 hours into something, like, by the way, your fly was undone the whole time.
Right, exactly.
Whereas I immediately notice, as soon as the camera's on me, I immediately notice every flaw that I see in myself, and I'm like, okay, this is freaking me out.
Oh, but somehow I've got to. Maybe I can try to become a performer. So let's see, show off kind of stuff. It's like, okay. So then let's see. There you go.
Yeah.
There's Thailand.
Wow. Cool. Yeah, that's definitely cooler than my shirt. I've just gone on a plain. It's got a pocket.
We got a pocket. Yeah. Right. So no. Well, I think that's all I can do. That's
oh, okay. That's the extent of it.
That's my spontaneous. That's my spontaneous self.
We'd already covered, some several different things, but the main point that I was trying to get across was what I love about Keirsey temperament is that, to me, it shines through more than anything else. I said that about is that because Ben, as is natural for his type, always is throwing in all these possibilities of, well, what about cultural upbringing, and what about Enneagram, and what about this and this, and I'm like, I'm not saying any of those things are invalid, but to me, the more that you observe people, the more that temperament, like, it supersedes all that, where you see that above all the, like, through culture differences, through Enneagram type, through, experience. When I talk to people of my type from all kinds of different cultures, which I've had the privilege of being able to do in the last few years, we'll start talking to each other, and we see those same ways of looking at things that go past all that stuff. We can have totally different upbringing, totally different culture. I mean, I've talked to people from Singapore and Eastern Europe and South America, like places that don't bear much resemblance to my environment in terms of the superficial stuff. But when we actually talk about, like, our motivations, the things that drive us, it's like we just start saying ditto and yes over and over again to each other, because anytime we say, well, here's how I see it, here's what it comes through,
I think you're similar. I think Prince Harry is such an artisan.
Yes. Yes, Mr. And I think his brother, the older brother, I think he's a guardian. I think he's a protector guardian. So, but yeah, Harry is he's out there.
I always give him as the example of an artisan, as to, the risk taking and the being bored in the routine environments.
Right.
Because I try to think of someone that someone will know.
Well, now it's a few years old now, but I always cited that famous Charlie Sheen interview he did with 2020, where you had you had all of the guardians falling all over themselves about, oh, he's crazy and he's so out there, and everything he said, I'm like, I understand exactly what he means. And there's another example of how I can have a completely different lifestyle than Charlie Sheen. I've never lived with porn stars. I've never, had all these. I've never, been hooked on drugs and all these things that he has experiences with, lifestyle-wise, because he was born into the environment he grew up in the Hollywood and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I can totally see myself, if I had been in that environment, turning out exactly the same, because everything that he said about, like, his philosophy, the way he looked at things, I related to all of it. I'm sitting there nodding and saying, yeah, this guy, I totally know what he's talking about. And you have this interviewer that's like, it's like she's from on another planet. She's like, you like to party. Why is that? These questions where Sheen is just looking at her like, are you serious? And then he has to come up with something like, I've got tiger blood and Adonis DNA. That's why.
Oh, and he made that phrase winning part of the culture.
Winning, exactly.
And now people will say it.
I love that. Like I don't know, but I get this feeling like Dave would have been the one standing up and applauding when she asked him, "Are you bipolar?" and he said, "I'm bi winning."
Before, Jeff, you talked about NFs being oversensitive, and I was going to say that Kretschmer called them hyper-aesthetic, and that's their chief characteristic, according to him, hypersensitive.
Hypersensitive, yes.
Yeah, well, it goes back to what you made the point about maturity, and I think that's everybody. They go through different forms of maturity, and NFs, like as what Dr. Keirsey said in the book, they sort of have this. They're trying to achieve like their guru status or whatever, but as their mature self. But before they get there, when they're young and immature, everything is a big deal. Everything is a big deal, man. Don't you understand? Like we got to save the world, man. And then, like, to me, I went through a phase like that when I was a teenager, but by the time I was maybe mid-20s, I was already over that. And that's why I love, that's how I knew for sure that I wasn't an idealist. When I read Please Understand Me Too, as a 30-something-year-old, and I looked at that and I'm like, wow, how did I ever think that I could be an F? And I'm like, well, it's because everyone has like an idealist phase. Even the most hardcore Guardian probably, they go to college, they hear all this stuff about, vision for the future, and this generation can change the world, and yeah, even an ISTJ, is going to hear that and be on board with it. Hey, it sounds cool. That sounds like a good thing. I want to be a part of that. But then, no matter how much they might say they're on board with it, if you really examine, what does that ISTJ do with their life, it's still more about, making sure that everything's properly in their planner before they do anything, than it is about trying to incite revolution. They're working against themselves if they do that, because their instinct is to stop revolutions. No, just get back to work. Do your job. That's what you're supposed to be doing, not revolting. Come on, stop that.
So this is a great way for Jeff to, because Jeff's not had a video up in months, so he's come back with a big shot.
Yeah, well, and I will appear on camera again. I'm not trying to be the, I guess in a way I sort of am. Like, was it Orson Welles that he stopped appearing on camera for like his last 10 years or something?
His last thing was a voice of Unicron in Transformers the movie.
I know, that's so awesome. Like, if you think about some of these fantastic actors, that their last thing was like, his was Unicron was his last part. Raul Julia, his last part was Bison in the Street Fighter movie. Stuff like that is great to me. Like, that's their final legacy.
Yeah, Dave, we both saw that, Jeff and I, when we were 10.
Oh, really?
The same age.
Okay.
When that Transformers movie came out, and it was all Japanese anime.
Right.
In the way it was done, it was amazing.
Oh, yeah, those modern live-action Transformers movies are garbage compared. Like, that classic movie was so much better. When you hear Orson Welles is the voice of a giant planet ship, and he says, "The point is, you were a fool." There's more in that line than there is in any of the garbage that they had in the new movies.
There's certain villains that will always, like Doctor Who villains, they will say fool and excellent.
Oh yeah. Even though we talked about this before, I don't like Pyramids of Mars. It has this reputation of being this classic, and I thought it was kind of boring. But I cannot deny that Sutek, when he says the line, "Your evil is my good," and it's just an awesome line. It's just delivered perfectly, and stuff like that's just iconic, and you see, some of all these stupid superhero movies that get made today, where you won't find anything in 2+ hours that's worth remembering. It's so forgettable. It's just one crap scene after another. And then one line from a Doctor Who story from the mid-'70s is so much more memorable.
No, here's a long shot, but David, have you seen Blake 7?
Blade 7?
Blake's 7.
Blake 7. No, I haven't seen it. So sorry.
No, because I was just trying to take just a long shot that if you'd said, "Oh, it's fantastic," it might have nudged Jeff to watch it because I've been trying to get Jeff to watch it.
He's so focused on that. He wants me to watch Blake 7.
I'd say. Yeah. Well, obviously there are some things that now this is that maybe we should talk about, in terms of tastes or something like that.
Yeah.
So, for example, actually, it took me a long time, probably about 40 or 50 years, to really appreciate Monty Python. Whereas I would imagine that you really enjoyed, both of you probably enjoyed Monty Python.
Well, initially, I liked it when I was younger, but now I actually see the gaps and the flaws in the logic, and I'm particularly pissed off by their politics.
So
that's true.
I liked it as a kid too, just because it was silly and fun, and I didn't understand any of the well, I wouldn't say any, but probably 85-90% of the satire aspects I didn't understand as a kid. I can understand them now and appreciate some of them, and to me, it makes some sketches better even than they were then. But the best ones to me are still. Probably overall are still the ones that are just silly fun, but as far as the satire goes, to me, when it comes to the politics ones, like when they're even-handed about it, then it's hilarious. Like I still think the one they did called Election Night Special, you could take that sketch and you could run it next to anything that MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, or whatever does now in their election coverage, and the only thing that's changed is the technology. Because everything, they're so spot on in the way that the political prognosticators try to pretend, and the sports people do this too, is they try to pretend like they predicted everything correctly, even if they said exactly the opposite. And they had that exact thing. They have the guy say, this result is exactly as I expected, except for the fact that the silly party won.
Right.
It's
So
like, this went exactly how I expected, except exactly the opposite.
So, because I'm thinking, because Ben is from that culture, right? I was from a different era. In fact, basically just about 6 or 7, maybe 10 years younger than the Monty Python people. But I didn't get it, like Jeff said, right? Because culturally I didn't get it, and I couldn't, and it seemed silly to me. So it didn't. But now I kind of can get some of the jokes. I can appreciate them more with the cynicism, but also the skepticism.
See, that's the great thing to me when I was talking about observing, the temperament differences. It comes through in that, he just used silly as like a negative.
Right.
Like I saw it and it was silly. So, and whereas I used it as that was the thing that was appealing to me.
That was appealing.
Right.
Well,
and you guys were talking about in that other hangout, Ben talked about, the impulsive thing, and he did the same thing. Like without even thinking about it, he used the word impulsive as like a negative. And
yes,
then
it is.
I've told him before, one of my favorite lines in the whole Please Understand Me book is the line that says, artisans are impulsive, they like being that way.
Yes.
And I like, and when I quote that, I put the like in like all caps, like emphasize. It's not, we're not fighting against that. It's like that's when we feel truly alive, is when we embrace that.
Yeah, so, but, let's take some things that I thought were silly, because I actually did like, Oliver, Laurel and Hardy. Okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, I just remember one joke is that they come out of a car, the car collapses, and it says, I told you not to make that last payment.
Right, exactly. So I think a lot of times, I think the rational, of course, obviously there are probably all kinds of different rationals that have different kind of sense of humor, but I enjoyed silliness too, if I could get it. Whereas I think maybe you could tell it was silly, whereas I could tell it was silly and I didn't get it. Do you think that is fair, Jeff?
Well, there's something like, what I think of is, because it used the word silly, is they had the sketch, the Ministry of Silly Walks. And, where everybody, it starts with the guy walking down the street, and he's wearing a suit and this very proper-looking, outfit, but he's doing this thing where every third step he swings his leg out weirdly or whatever. He's doing this, silly walk. It's exactly how they describe it. And that, obviously, there was a layer to that where it was satirizing, British government having things that were insignificant that the government was focusing too much on. But as a kid, me seeing that, I'm just seeing it's hilarious to see these proper-looking people walking all silly. Like, that's the funny part to me, was just that. I didn't have to understand that. I didn't have to get that this was trying to satirize the government. To me, it's just the hilarity of having these people walking around in these ridiculous ways. And to me, the audience helps. That's another thing I think it also shows a difference, is that there's some types that seem to react adversely to, you hear the audience laughter, they'd rather not hear that. To me, it adds to it. Like, that's part of the experience, is having that audience reaction, because I can feel it on both levels of enjoying it as part of the audience, but also thinking about my own kind of performances, and the thrill is in the audience reaction. So the more you hear that, and yeah, there's some laugh tracks and things that get a little obnoxious where you're like, hey, you need to tone that down a little because it's detracting from the performance. But when you have genuine audience reactions, to me, that's awesome and part of the experience. The same thing of a sporting event, the crowd reaction, makes such a. That's the reason that a sellout crowd is more fun than 100 people showed up. The sporting event itself can be exactly the same, but the experience, when you have that sellout crowd getting loud, and so it's so much cooler.
Yeah, and that for me, it just completely turn off. I don't like the crowd.
Yeah.
With me, with humor is Douglas Adams is always there's like a progression of the humor where with Spike Milligan, and then the Python was more intellectual and sophisticated than the Milligan humor, and then Douglas Adams was more intellectual. And the best was the bit I showed David in the Hangout. That was like Douglas Adams at his absolute best, and then there would be other points where it would become silly. Like, instead of the infinite improbability drive, they would have the bistro math, which worked on the mathematics that only worked in a bistro about calculating the bill.
Okay.
And a somebody else's problem field, so that nobody actually notices the ship there because it's got this special field around it. So it's this. So they were a bit, but they did have a nice idea, David, called the clairvoyant lifts, so that the lift would know to be on the right floor in order to pick people up. But this lift, because it had this clairvoyance, and he called it defocused temporal perception, where it was able to look about half an hour into the future. This lift was worried.
Yeah,
and
he
said to Zaphod that he was worried about the future, and Zaphod replied, "You're worried about the future, but you want a pension scheme?"
Yeah, so I'm wondering, because I noticed that I never did get into Adams because I think I don't find any humor. I don't read humor. That's of course the science fiction's another aspect. But Jeff, do you see the? Did you read Adams or any of those sophisticated?
Not really. I tried when I was a kid, because when you're growing up, like, no matter what temperament somebody is, I think to a point you kind of imitate your elders in some ways. You try to, and so my dad, a mastermind rational, had seemingly every sci-fi book known to man in his library, and my older brother, an architect rational, ate up most of that same stuff. Like, he loved the Piers Anthony and Isaac Asimov books, and and all these different things like that. And so I would attempt to read some of that stuff because I was like, well, I want to be cool too,
Right. Right.
But I could never really get into it. No, I mean, I almost never finished those books.
Oh, now if somebody was doing a drive-by typing, they would say, "Oh, Jeff, that makes him a guardian because he's doing what everybody else wants to do."
Well, but again,
Right.
that's what the point I was making is that everybody's got a little bit of that. It's like nobody exists in a vacuum. I mean, you have people that, even the people that are doing like, I'm the goth look and I'm going to be this hermit,
Right.
that doesn't.
They're part of the culture.
Exactly. You can't unless you actually go live in a cave your whole life, you can't detach completely from that.
Right.
I think I don't remember the exact line, but there's something in the books too about that, about everything. You're part of a society. Everything you do, this human interaction. There's a feedback to everything. So the thing with artisans, I think naturally what we do is we're trying to relate to other people, but we're always looking for that angle of how do we turn this into what is the thing we like to do best. And like I was saying earlier, my thing was improvisation. Right. And so the subconscious instinct that I had if I was trying to fit into a group, it was to try to find that angle for how can I make it this something where I can perform, where I can entertain people. Right. And so if I was reading a book that I really didn't have much interest in, to try to sort of get in with a certain group of people, even if it was my own family, it was because that gave me an opportunity the next time we're playing Monopoly or we're doing something where everybody's gathered around, I can make a joke about something related to that, and then we all understand what we're talking about because we've all read the same thing. There's a relation there. And the contrast of that is when I'm together with my brothers and they're talking about a certain video game thing or that they've both played, they've both done a lot of the MMO video games like World of Warcraft and Star Wars, whatever, and so they have these things. They can talk for hours about those, and I totally don't relate to it because I haven't played those things. I'm not in that world. Right. So to me, I'm just instantly detached from that. The only thing I can do is listen for them to say something that reminds me of something else that I know they know, and then I can make a joke about that. But right. I can't fully be part of that because I haven't had that same experience. So if there's a shared experience that we can all talk about, then it's much more like, I can be much more a part of it. And so
right.
that's the aspect of it, I think. And of course, as a kid, I didn't understand any of that. I'm just being me, I'm just doing
right.
my thing.
Right.
But I tried to get into some of those books because, there's always, I think every kid, he was my dad. I did think in a lot of ways he was a cool guy. I always admired his ability. I mean, to me, I've always said the thing about the names, for the roles, that my parents, there was never doubt, for me, if you didn't tell me anything about the type descriptions, anything about what rational or idealist meant or anything like that, and you just gave me like a stack of those names, and you said, pick two out for your mother and father, the one I would have picked out for my mother would be counselor, and the one for my dad would have been mastermind. I mean, those would have been, I'm like, they described them perfectly. Right. And so with my dad, it's like, I was always amazed at and in awe of the way he could master anything that he put his mind to. When he said, this is mechanical stuff, he would help us build model rockets and our cars for the Boy Scouts, and he just seemed to have this magical ability to figure stuff out. It was like if he didn't understand something, he would put his mind to it, and then he did understand it. It was amazing to me, and that's the thing I always admired about my father. For all the things that I could be put off by about him, those were the things that made me like in awe of my dad. And so anything that he was into, computers and sci-fi and things like that, I was going to attempt to relate to him somehow on that. And the funny thing is that like those first times as a kid, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, when I learned enough about something that he wasn't masterful on, that I was able to catch him not knowing something about that I did know. And that was such an amazing moment to me, like, because we talked about sports. And he was a casual observer of sports, but he was never the way I was. He was never obsessed with sports. I had a period where that was my number one thing. And so when I started talking about a particular football thing, and he responded with something that I knew he didn't know what he was talking about, And this happened with a few other subjects too. It happened with music. It happened, things that anything that I really got into that was not part of his purview.
Right.
It was this great moment because I could just kind of chuckle to myself. I would never do it out loud because I was afraid of my dad. But inside, I'm thinking, you don't know what you're talking about. I know more than you do, and I'm just a kid. And that was just like a glorious moment to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
What's interesting is one of the things I've mentioned with David is and Jeff's before you came on, David. Jeff really likes Brains and Careers and thinks it's better.
Really?
Than Personology. So maybe you could talk about that. Why do you like it so much, Jeff?
Well, first of all, it's got colors in it.
Yeah, that's always good.
That was the number one thing. If you look at all of these books about personality type, very few of them have any colors in them.
Right.
So
Brains and Careers, Brains and Careers has the color, and that's the best part with the colors and the card, the spades and the clubs and all that and stuff.
Right.
I'm like, that stuff's cool, so already it grabbed my attention with that stuff. And then there's things like, to me, it really started to, first of all, the title. Like, to me, I noticed things like that, and the titles, Please Understand Me sounds like an idealist thing.
Yeah.
Whereas Brains and Careers, it's like it's simultaneously rational and guardian, because it's drawing the rationals with the brains and the guardians with the careers. So already it sounds like a more serious book. Like, you see that on the shelf, and Brains and Career, that sounds like, they're getting into some serious topics here. Whereas Please Understand Me, 85% of the population sees that title and they're like, what kind of new age weird stuff is that?
Yeah.
So, of course, me, I'm heavy on the feeler, the F side. Right. So I can see Please Understand Me, and I can be like, yeah, I want people to understand me, man. But
yeah, actually, I was just saying, Jeff, do you want to do your joke about your function, about your dichotomy?
I don't know if Dave's heard that or not, but yeah, I always said on the Myers-Briggs test, the EI thing, I would fluctuate some on that and on the N versus S somewhat, but the thing was, on the F versus T was like 100% F, and the JP is like 100% P. So if you think about it, I'm really defined by my F and penis.
I hadn't heard that before, Jeff.
I love when I can get a laugh with that joke still. But,
that's great. That's great. No, that's fantastic.
It's like one of the few things that remains from my my video I did with Amber originally when she interviewed me, because she took all her videos down. But that's Celebach Wayne. He saved that. He has that clip on his channel, so that one lives forever. But so that I can relate to the feeling side of I always say, and I told Mike with NF Geeks the same thing. Like, I totally relate to the F. It's only when they get into the N stuff that they completely lose me. But yeah, the book, Brains and Careers, like
you could show it on webcam.
I read that. Nice try there, Ben. But I was reading that at a Little League game. My son playing baseball, and there's downtime or time before the game starts when they're warming up, whatever. And I hate to just be sitting there doing nothing. And so I was reading the book, and people started asking me about it. Because you sit there reading, Gone with the Wind, or you're reading the newspaper, or you're reading something that people like instantly recognize. They dismiss it. It's like, okay, that's that's what they're reading, whatever. But they see something they don't, expect somebody at a baseball game is going to be reading, and then instantly people are like, oh, what's that, And then I love to be able to tell somebody about it and be like, oh, it's this thing, And it's especially when the person I'm talking to kind of gets it, even at a very simple level, and even it's unexpected environments. When there was a particular place I used to go to watch sports. And this guy that was there, we were sort of both regulars there. So when we met up with each other, we didn't ever schedule to be there at the same time. We just would end up there watching the same game and stuff. And we would talk, and it started out just being about the sports stuff, And we were sort of rivals because he was a Texas A&M fan and I'm Texas Tech, so we would have that rivalry going when they were playing each other. And then sometimes we were on the same side. If it was a Texas Rangers baseball game, we both were rooting for the Rangers. So then we had both sides of it, both opposing and being on the same side. But then, after I'd read Please Understand Me Too, and I'd started to get into some of this stuff about temperament, personality type, the issue came up. It was when Brett Favre had retired, and then he decided to come back and play some more, football. And this guy, who I think is probably a guardian, he starts going on this rant about how selfish Brett Favre is. He can't stand to not be in the spotlight, and he wants to, he's so egotistical and stuff. And I was able to get through to the guy because I brought temperament up. I said, I think Brett Favre, it's not about a legacy or what he's tarnishing, whatever. It's about he sits there and he watches the football game at home and he goes, I can still do that. It's still in his blood. He wants to be part of the action. It's not, does he enjoy attention? Sure, but it's not even as much about that as it is the actual just being out there, being the quarterback, throwing the reckless pass that gets intercepted half the time. Whatever. Like, that's the thing is when we saw Brett Favre play, like he was throwing an interception, and then if the camera showed him, he was smiling. And there's people, the Guardians are all mad at that. Like, why is he smiling? He just threw an interception. He's supposed to be pissed, But the thing was that they enjoyed throwing an interception almost as much as he enjoyed throwing a touchdown pass, because it was just all part of the fun. And so I'm telling this guy this stuff and kind of using that as my way to kind of introduce the concept of temperament and stuff to him. And then I brought him Please Understand Me Too later on, and he's like, it was like he started reading the basic stuff. When I just kind of laid out, here's the basics of the 4 temperaments, it was like he's going, oh yeah, I know people like that. Everything I was saying to him, and he was like, he's actually said to him, he's like, you really gave me something to think about, because I would have never thought that about Brett Favre. I just thought the guy was just he just
a jerk.
Yeah, he just so he just has this huge ego, and I'm like, he may have a huge ego, but it's not really about that. So things like that was when I had been on blood pressure medication, but not for long, so I wasn't used to remembering to take it. And I got so fired up talking to this guy about this, I felt my heart beating too fast. I was like, oh man, I didn't take my medication today. Because I got so pumped up, because stuff like that just gives me that buzz where I'm like, I want to sustain this as long as possible. So that was the cool thing, is this thing that 10 years before, even 5 years before that, you would have told me I would have gotten pumped up about something related to psychology. I would have said you were crazy.
Right.
But that's the thing, is it applied. I was able to find that application to real life, to real people, And once I had that connection, even as I did, my usual artisan thing of losing interest in the subject and moving on to something else, I could never drop that completely, because everywhere I would go, I would still see it. I would, like I said, temperament would still come out. You'd see an interaction between real people, between fictional characters, whoever it was, and it's like I'm seeing it right in front of my eyes. I'm like, oh, this is a classic, guardian versus artisan conflict, or it's idealist versus guardian, or whatever it was. I'm like, I can't get away from that. It's everywhere.
You want to see it. It's hard. You can't not see it.
Yeah, and so that's why I started to look, and that's why when it became, I think there was a part in your father's book where he said something like, once I understood, this, typing became easier to me, or something like that. And I'm like, it's the same thing. Like, I'll see these endless debates on the internet forums between intuitive types about what function is this person displaying in this situation, and I'm like, it's so obvious to me that it goes past that, where it's like I don't have to say this person is using their extroverted feeling in the 6th position on this, I could just go, more than anything else, this guy is irrational, and everything he's saying is betraying that, even if he's not trying to. It's coming out. And I was talking to Ben earlier about, yes, there are people who actively try to portray a facade, because that's the devil's advocate. There is always people like, well, what if they're not revealing their true self to you? They're actively invested in portraying this false version of themselves. Yeah, of course there are people that do that.
Yeah,
but
in certain situations too, right? I mean, politicians, it's hard to tell. They're all idealists.
That's what I've noticed about politics, if you look at even just take the presidential elections, in my lifetime, the Democrats always try to sound like idealists, and the Republicans try to sound like guardians. And even if they're not actually that type, obviously there's so many guardians that plenty of Republican politicians are actually guardians, but even the ones that aren't still try to sound like it, because they always try to play that angle of, we're the ones who are going to be the moral ones, and we're going to take care of your money, and we're not going to be reckless, and we're and even artisans like George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan they played the angle of the guardian. Reagan was like, wrap myself in the flag, and it's all about we're togetherness as a people, and on our proud traditions of America. There was all these. It was loaded with all this guardian language, even though he wasn't a guardian himself. Same thing with Bush. When he first ran in 2000.
Compassionate conservative.
Yeah, and it was about restoring the moral attitude of the presidency, because of all the stuff that happened with Clinton and the scandals. His campaign was very much about reining it in. And the Please Understand Me Too covered that same aspect with Harry Truman, taking over for FDR. In that case, he was of the same party, but it was still the same sentiment. Like, there was a lot of people even within the Democrat Party that were like, this New Deal stuff is going a little crazy. We got to rein this in here, and we got to slow down a little bit, And so the terminology is like, and then I guess it's the opposite for the Democrats. In my lifetime, everything is about hope and change. And if we just believe, yes, we can. It's all this very idealist language about everything is, if we just join hands and somehow float around in this magical world of everyone's together, and somehow everything will just solve itself. There was that interview with the woman in 2008 talking about Obama that was like, there's going to be gas in my car, and my college loans are going to be paid off, and she was living in this fantasy world that somehow magical Obama was going to just rise up in the sky and just grant everyone's wishes. But that's, so they took advantage of that.
Right.
There doesn't have to be a lot of idealists in the population. People like hearing idealist language. It sounds cool. It appeals to people's feelings and makes them feel good to hear these things.
Hypnotic as well. So, Jeff, so comparing the two books, Brains and Careers and Personology, am I right in saying that you've not just got both of them, you've read both of them?
Mm-hmm.
So where is Brains and Careers better than Personology, and where is Personology better than Brains and Careers?
Well, okay, to be fair, it's been a little while since I read either one of them, like all the way through. But I think Brains and Careers seemed a little bit more, like I was saying earlier, a little more coherent, in that it seemed like it was maybe slightly better organized. One of the things I thought was really cool about was in the artisan section, it brought up a concept that wasn't in the Please Understand Me books, about the concept of consonants, what sounds good. That was one of my favorite parts of that. And to me, that was part of why Brains and Careers was better, because the consonants of the language in it was better than Personology. And I loved the part, because when it got into the stuff about artisan language, it started to become its own performance piece. Like I still, one of these days, I thought about, I should do a video or something where I do a dramatic reading of that chapter of the book, because it's so cool when you start to get in, even if the language itself is outdated. That's the problem with, and we talked about this on the forum a while back, of like slang words and stuff. As soon as you put slang words out there, they're already out of date. Right. Because the culture's moved on to new words. And so, but that actually is part of what makes it cool, because when you read that book, a lot of the stuff, the words seem like they're out of like the 50s or something. So it's like this retro feel to it.
Well,
and it's just a list of words, and it just flows so well. Like, I don't have it quite close enough to me to grab it, but it's like, it's just, this person is scared, a fraidy cat, a wimp, but it just goes into this list of like hitting these words, like, and it becomes this thing. And that's what I thought was cool about it, is that it seemed like the chapters about the temperaments they were written in language more so than ever that fit with that temperament, they would understand it even better. It was like, it's sort of like immersing yourself in this world. Not only am I going to tell you about this temperament, but you're going to read the way that they would talk about these things. And so it's almost like you sort of add this added layer of, you know, I'm going to experience or attempt to experience what it's like to be an idealist or be a rational, because the majority, you know, huge majority of the population doesn't know what that feels like. And so when you start reading all these things about, you know, idealists, you know, the search for self, and if you find yourself, is your quest over? Because, you know, and all that stuff about, because most people read that and they're like, what? And so it becomes this thing, you know, where I know that the idealists reading it are really looking at that. Yes, somebody finally understands me. You know, understands this endless paradox of life. And then most people are looking at that like, man, I don't want to run into one of these people. And that's what I try to get across in the type groups, because it seems that there's a lot of obliviousness to that. It's like they'll talk about, there's a lot of the intuitive types, a lot of complaining about, you know, the oppression by the censors in their life. You know, more about guardians, but sometimes artisans. Generally, artisans get talked about more as like bullies and stuff like that, even though a lot of us are not bullies and never were. But the thing is, there's a lot of like, oh, well, because the censors are the majority, you know, they don't know what it's like to feel alone and left out and not part of the group. And I'm like, come on, everybody knows what it feels like. Yeah, everybody experiences that. And the other thing is they'll talk about these conflicts they have. Like, there, you know, in the NF Geeks group, there was a lot of specifically talk from NFs about growing up with SJs and how they can't communicate with each other, and here's the issue I'm having with them. And the thing when I observed that is I was like, the thing that you have to understand if you have any hope of like improving communication is that it starts out, you're starting out from completely different places, and you know that all these things, like if you're a 30-year-old idealist, then you have thought about everything in the world, your place in the world, how you relate to people, how other people communicate with each other, all these things. You've thought about that stuff your whole life, like as long as you can remember. The average guardian has only thought about any of that if it was required for their job or a college course. You know, that's just not something that guardians are going to immerse themselves in unless there's some sort of practical benefit to it.
Right.
And so from the start, your approach is completely different, that you have to accept that, first of all, when you as the idealist say to the guardian, I want you to understand and respect me as a person, those words mean completely different things to the guardian, because the guardian looks at you and is thinking, you know, I've provided you food or shelter or, you know, whatever practical things you needed, I've provided these things for you. Isn't that respecting you as a person? You know, they look at that as what else can I do? You know, I'm not attacking you. I'm not throwing things at you. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do to another person to respect them. And they cannot even fathom that the idealist is talking about a level, you know, an understanding that they just have no concept of.
Right.
And so that's the point I would try to get across to people, is like, there's so distant, you know, there's such a big gap from the start that and because there's so many more guardians, you know, there's so many more people that are viewing it this way, that they're looking at you as the weirdo, and not even in a mean-spirited way. You know, it's not a point the finger, oh, this person's so crazy. But really, when you start talking about the basics of what makes an idealist, even when you start talking about intuition, like this concept of intuition, already is a weird thing to most sensing type people. Like they think, oh, that people use the term. They'll say, oh, women's intuition, things. They have these sort of trite phrases that they use of like, oh, how did you know this person was a loser? Well, it was my intuition. They'll throw that around there, and they're not talking about what intuitive types are talking about when they say intuition. It's a whole different kettle of worms.
Yeah.
And that's
one of the reasons that my father really wanted to abandon intuitive versus sensing. So he uses the term observant versus introspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of hopefully gives people a better sense of, because obviously, there's gut. The artisans and the guardians and the artisans are, they have the gut feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's intuition.
Well, even though looking at things in those different ways, you still describe. So for instance, with your type, your profile is very much the same in socionics, even though they're looking at it through completely different lenses. You actually get to an end point that's pretty similar in the description.
Right. It's The only problem is it's two different languages, and so if you're not familiar with that language, it gets all very confusing.
But just little bits like, I see what you mean. But from the point of view of a socionics person, when they read about just the bits in the INTP profile,
mm-hmm.
and what we would do is say, oh, that's that function, that's that, the way we would look at it, and it's like, oh, that's in there, that's amazing. But it makes sense because we went through a socionics profile with you, and you seem to fit that, and that's why, because you're the same type.
Well, what I found, and we talked about this before, Ben, is when I looked at the socionics, description of my type, it seemed like almost everything was either spot on or completely wrong. It was like there was no gray area. Either it was exactly me or it was not me at all. And that to me, I looked at it and I said, I think the flaw in that description, in that profile, was that when it got into things that really were more cultural, they were more about the kind of environment you grow up in. And it really seemed, with, again, socionics, it comes from Russia. It has a very Russian bias to it. This is how Russian culture sees these things. And the things that were more specifically that way, I didn't relate to. Whereas the things that were more about the basic preference, I did. Because I'm like, I understand this. But we talked about it before, and you talked about it in the Hangout, the other day I wasn't part of, about the whole thing about freedom and power.
Yeah.
Because if I examine it, I can say, well, yeah, in a way, power is important to me, but it's power in a certain in a certain way, in a certain method. There's some power that I don't care at all about. It's not the kind of power that a rational like Newt Gingrich is trying to. It's not his. People are like, how did that dude who looks like a gray white-haired troll? How does he get so many chicks? How does he get all these hot chicks after him? I'm like, it's because those are the women they're attracted to power, and it's that kind of power that he's got, and that's not the kind of power that attracts me.
Is Newton the NTP?
And probably, I don't know if Dave would agree with me on that, but it seems like it.
Muddler.
I mean,
do you think Newt's a muddler, Dave?
No, he's actually I've wandered around on him. He's irrational, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I would say, I think initially I would just say mastermind. Or
that was my initial thought too, and then I sort of got convinced by people that
I think he might be more of field marshal.
Does he in debates? Does he digress a lot?
No. He has an advantage on most people. He knows history.
Yeah, he was I think he has a PhD in history. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, and he was he's a teacher. Yeah. He taught history. So he understands that, and he sees it from a systemic point of view. It's just that he believes in he's a Christian, and so and sometimes it doesn't make when I listen to him, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, makes sense, and then all of a sudden he starts talking like a Republican, and then I say, I can't get that.
And the pattern there, is that there's so many like the rationals that are the campaign strategists behind the artisan and guardian politicians.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so Newt was much more successful as the architect of, the Republicans took over Congress in '94. Right. He was much more successful doing that than he was as himself as a politician.
Right.
When he ran for president, when he was Speaker of the House, he wasn't good at the showmanship part of it. He's not an artisan. He's not good at that. He comes off awkward. But when it comes to strategizing a campaign, he was extremely effective and, did in fundraising and all those kind of things that are so much a part of politics. He was amazing.
And also, the electorate has changed, right? It's no longer acceptable to be more religious in some sense, right? The more people are on the fence. I mean, most people are, you call them spiritual, but they're not organized religion.
I think it's kind of a funny tightrope we go in America, because it's like you have to convince people, because again, we're still majority guardian, so you have to convince people that, oh yeah, he's a good organized religion person, but then you can't say too much of it, because then that's scary. It's like when George W. Bush was like, I'm going to restore the moral thing. Clinton was too reckless and too degrading to the presidency. The Guardians were like, yeah, we need a more moral person. But then as soon as Bush started talking about here's how Jesus Christ changed my heart, then some of them were kind of like, whoa there, don't get too crazy on us there. Just talk about, just say God, country, America. That's good enough,
And there's also most of the Democrats are guardians too.
Yes.
Yes.
So they're more are more secular religionists, right?
Right. There's still some of those old school Catholic Democrat guardians, like Chris Matthews from Hardball.
Right.
He's so great because he's so true to himself, and everything he says, you can tell exactly where he's coming from, even if you think he's completely out to lunch in what he's saying. He doesn't ever go against that tradition. He's so up there, and even when he's ranting against his own people, against the Democrats, it's always from that point of view of, here's what a Democrat is supposed to be. Here's the things we're supposed to stand for. And this person is going off the reservation and doing all this stuff that just doesn't fit. It's not doing what the working people, what the blue collar workers need. And he's so for me, he's fun to watch because again, it's that thing where even if I'm not focused on that, his temperament stuff, it comes through in everything he says.
Right. To me, there's no essential difference between politics and religion. I don't see much difference. I can't.
Yes, I can't tell. Ideology.
Politics is their religion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Worship at the altar.
Jeff, now you've got him here. Have you got any questions for David?
Okay.
Things you've been thinking about for years.
Well, why did I kick you off this forum a long time ago?
I didn't think you ever actually kicked me off. You kind of threatened to a couple of times, but
I guess you're right.
Yeah, I've ruffled the idealist feathers a little too much on a few occasions, but
yes.
The thing, because when we start talking about communities online, because that's obviously the wave of the future, as they say, it's all this online community. When it comes to personality, there's a very strong online contingent. We were talking about this earlier, that I call them the Jung theists, because they worship at the altar of Jung, and everything is about when somebody is trying to understand themselves. I like the part when in the other Hangout when you talked about the sorter was intended to help people understand themselves. but you have people that say, oh, you have to learn every little thing about the functions. You have to learn the functions, and then you'll be able to find yourself. The thing is, 90% of the people out there, they're never going to learn that.
Right.
And so if you take that attitude, you know, you're basically just alienated so many people. But the problem is a lot, you know, hold on, Ben.
Yep.
the intuitives think that this is the way to go because it's the way that they learn things. And so there's that disconnect. And so I guess my question would be, how do we kind of reshape the focus, you know, sort of get it through the heads of the intuitives that are the majority online, but not everywhere else. They're the majority online in the type communities. How do we get it kind of through their heads of, you know, look at what's right in front of you, and instead of convoluting things, try to simplify it. You know, what's the method of achieving that?
But I would say that they don't actually understand the functions, because a year or two ago I would post on Facebook actual explanations of the functions, and I was tearing my hair out. These supposed intuitives couldn't understand it.
No, most of them can't.
And
Yeah.
I can't understand it either. I'm biased, but I can't understand it either. No.
So
Yeah,
most of the people who talk about the functions, they don't understand. They don't understand them. They're not. They don't, because it is something that takes, and it is also that it fits into the rest of his system, and you have to, like, especially with introverted intuition, you can only understand that if you buy into.
I
But
guess
the thing is,
stuff.
Sorry, go
the
ahead.
thing is, Jung didn't have a system. All he had was a book. Okay.
Well, okay.
Right? You're
Yeah.
putting a system on his stuff, and he didn't have a system. All he did was talked about three polar features, and, you know, talked to this stuff about archetypes.
Well, well,
Yeah. So I guess sort of reframing, you know, my question.
yeah.
That's the thing is, I hear so much. You know, your dad gets blamed for. They always say, oh, well, Keirsey relies on stereotypes because he focused on behavior, so it's all about, oh, well,
Right.
this person's a jock, so they must be an artisan. This person, that, you know.
Right.
The thing is, to me, it's so obvious that the function fetish, as NF Geeks put it, you know, I think that was a cool phrase, but that to me is even more about stereotypes, because you're not even stereotyping someone's actual behavior, you're stereotyping their mind. Somehow you think that you can say, oh, well, anyone who has extroverted feeling in the 5th position is going to do this. And, like, you can't even say that about, you know, anyone who's, you know, from Bulgaria. How are you going to say it about anyone who has this function in this position? And
Right.
so it's not that, you know, to me, I look at it and I think I can see some validity to why, you know, as Ben said, these functions, when you really describe them, you say, here's what it actually means in application to real people.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't oppose it to that. To me, it's a supplement. It's like you figure out temperament, you figure out type, and you say, okay, here are these subtle differences between communication and people. Here are these things that could purport to explain it.
Right.
But the focus, you know, on just on the human understanding, on those basic conflicts I was talking about earlier. You got an idealist, you've got a guardian. How do they even get to page 1 of trying to relate to each other and communicate better? You're not going to do it by explaining. The idealist is not going to convince the guardian to read psychological types or to understand, you know, FI versus FE. They're not going to get them to do that on a, you know, yeah, maybe a very small group of them will, but in a general basis, it's not going to work. So how does that person actually get to that point? And to me, you have to focus on what's the simple part. And so I guess, again, my question is, like, what do you think the best way to sort of have that be, you know, be the dominant view in the communities that discuss this stuff? How do we get that message, you know, more popular?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm trying, you know, to give examples, right? You just say, well, here's an example, but don't take them, you know, just learn from the example, and say, you know, and of course, and I keep telling people, no, there's no such thing as a guardian. There's no such thing as an artisan. They're individuals, and you got to take them for, their culture. But it's the pattern and the guide. Take this stuff as guides. Don't take it as stereotypes.
Right.
Don't stereotype. Don't stereotype.
But yeah, that's what I mean. It's frustrating because you have so many people, even people I like and respect,
right,
who say Keirsey is responsible for these stereotypes. I'm like, no, people reading it wrong are responsible for stereotypes. People misusing the information. Well, to me, it's pretty obvious when you read something that says artisans are the great fighter pilots. You read a sentence like that, and I don't immediately think, okay, if you're an artisan, you must be a fighter pilot, or if you're a fighter pilot, you must be an artisan. I'm reading that and thinking, okay, what he's saying is the people most proficient in this area fit with this kind of, temperament.
Activity.
And
activity.
That's, again, another thing I liked about Brains and Careers is it really focused on repeated. This is what I don't get about people continuing to say, Keirsey says, even Dario Nardi said this. He said something about Keirsey's like, oh, well, if you're a psychologist or if you're a counselor, well, you must be an idealist. He never said that.
Yeah.
He said that if you are a counselor by nature, that's your natural role, your instinct, you are going to fit that role easier. You're not going to have to work as hard. Right. But if you are, a promoter artisan in your instinct, and you want to be a counselor by profession or by practice, you're going to have to work a lot harder because you're fighting your own instincts. It doesn't mean that you can't become that. It means that you've got to work hard because you're coming from a completely different way of looking at things.
And you actually, being a counselor, you're quite different because what'll happen is the promoter actually, I've had this situation, the promoter, there's a completely different way of counseling. They basically say, you got to do this, and they get you to do it, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe I should have done that. But in general, it's hard because basically they'll start trying to make you do other things that you don't want to do.
Yeah, that's why it's kind of my theory that the sort of rank and file or the typical person in a profession of counseling is probably more likely going to be an idealist, but the ones that are the ones that become famous, like the self-help guru type people, those are more likely to be artisans because it's about the performance, about the show, more than it is really the message.
There's a couple that are idealists and then a couple artisans. But actually, most school counselors, are guardians. Yes, you got to remember. Most people are guardians.
In terms of like a public school situation, I agree with you. And I was talking about the people, I guess, pursue that as a career.
As a career.
Right, because most school counselors, they probably didn't even start out wanting to be a counselor. They wanted to be a teacher or they wanted to be an administrator, and then counselor was sort of we need to fill this position, so who can we fill this position with? And you have your pool of guardians, and you pick somebody from it.
Right. Dario looked at, I think I mentioned this before in a previous Hangout, he looked at the brains of an INTP that are doing jobs not usual for their type. So, for instance, one that was an analyst had part of the brain very active for listening, and that there was activity more associated with, say, an INFP for when they were being a counselor. And then there was one, so very much on the listening side, and then there was another INTP that was a diplomat that was very much in region T5 that was about being very socially attentive and visually attentive to body language and all that sort of stuff. And so it's to show that there is type, but it's also dynamic as well because of what you get used to, and you've been doing it with expertise. And also, Dario he said he's an INTJ, but he is and it'll be the same with your father as well. Is if you these different life experiences, if you're doing a lot of lectures, doing a lot of public speaking, and you're learning all of these skills over many years, that's one thing. And then maybe you study NLP, which is all about what seems to me, from my point of view, is all about NTs learning people skills, because it's a very NT system. I mean, even the title, neuro-linguistic programming.
Right. Well, you got to realize the original guy that they modeled it off was a counselor idealist. Milton Erickson was, to me, a counselor idealist, and of course he said that the two, one a con man and the other one a reasonable guy, missed the point of what he was trying to do.
Oh, who is? I think your father mentioned the name. Was it Gregory Bateson? And I might have seen that mentioned in one of the NLP books.
Right.
Was he a big guy in terms of psychology, Gregory Bateson?
Well, Bateson, of course, was an anthropologist. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But he also thought from a holistic point of view. So he was more of an ecology, and so he wrote The Ecology of the Mind. But he also got together with Jay Haley, and they went down to Milton Erickson and watched him, and mostly Haley. But the Bateson was the one that came up with the name double bind. Erickson, all this was implicit in his system, and he hated theory. But Bateson was the one that came up with the double bind and really kind of explained it in a more scientific way. I think Bateson is an inventor rational.
So, do you want to tell the viewers what a double bind is?
Double bind is a way of communicating. So the classic double bind is, here's your significant other, your wife, right? And she says, "You don't love me." Well, that's a double meaning, right? Because the context gives one message. Well, your wife and a husband, and therefore you love each other, right? And so therefore, but she says, "You don't love me." Well, that's saying, contradicting the message, so that the message is coming two ways, basically. There's a message this way and a message that way, and they're contradictory. So you're getting a double bind. You say, "No, I don't love you." Well, then she'd get upset because, you're saying, "Yeah, I don't love you," and you're contradicting the situation, right? Or you say, "Well, I do love you." Well, now you're contradicting that person, right? The wife, right? It's when did you stop beating your wife kind of situation. That's the double bind. It's a paradoxical communication. That's what the double bind is, and that's what Gregory Bateson did. And basically, Erickson used it as a method of curing people. He basically what's called prescribed the symptom. If the husband goes out and drinks, right, and carouses, okay, and then he comes home and the wife nags him. Well, Erickson would say, "Well, you don't have enough freedom, and I want you to go out and at least stay out till 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, you can't come back before 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, and I want you to report to me that you did this." He's prescribing the symptom. He's saying, I'm giving the client a double bind. If you do what you say you do, then you're behaving him, right? And you're no longer going to do it for the reason of pissing off the wife because the wife is nagging, right? And of course the wife is nagging because the guy is trying to control the relationship. It's called role. That's what people do, is they're trying to control the relationship if the relationship is not the way they want it. And so so what happened is Erickson would fix the client by getting them to realize that their behavior, defensive behavior, is crazy and it's not productive, and you want to do productive behavior. But you basically have to get outside the system to do that. So that's the systems theory stuff. So
your father wrote that Frame Analysis by Irving Goffman was the most important book in social psychology. What is the book about, and should I get it?
I think you get something out of it. Basically, what Goffman did was talk about systems and their contexts, and so what's going around in the system, and analyzing the systems, and the fact that what people do, and then he came up with the notion of reframing.
Yes, that's used in NLP.
Right, reframing the problem, just like the double bind. Double bind is a reframing tactic. Okay, so I would say yes. It's the problem with Goffman is that he's got diarrhea of the mouth, like most of these guys. And so me, I'm from physics and chemistry, and I want to get to the point. And these guys in social sciences, they just they go on and on and on and on, and basically the idea could be summarized in maybe one chapter, 2 chapters. But it's a pretty good book, actually. If you don't understand, it gives you a different way of thinking about things.
Right.
Ben, when you talked about it was like the NT approach to learning social skills and stuff, it reminded me of the Simpsons episode where Bart and Lisa are writing the Itchy and Scratchy cartoons, but then they want to be taken seriously, so they have to attach an adult's name to it. So they put Grandpa on the script, and so he, they think he's writing it even though it's really the kids.
Right.
And the producer takes Grandpa to the writer's room and he says, "I want to introduce you to a real writer. This man has something that the rest of you clods don't, and that's life experience." And one of the writers says, "Excuse me, but I wrote my senior thesis on life experience."
Yeah. Do you want me? I'll tell the world a secret. My father's secret. Maybe my business partner would be, is that my father would use the tactic. He would assign his ideas to other people, so that people would then not say, "Well, no, it's not my father's idea. It's this other person's." Like, he gave so much credit to Isabel Myers and Carl Jung and Haley and Erickson and all this kind of stuff. And reality is that his ideas, he did get some of those ideas from him, but he also added the notion of temperament in terms of all these relationships. So if you read a lot of this stuff, you can't get it. Like, I don't know, you probably can get something out of Kretschmer, but sticothymes and schizotymes, you got to really, really read it in depth to figure out that's NS.
What strikes me about that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like that method you were talking about, or the tactic, is he realized, of course, that there was majority guardians, so he's appealing to that authority. These people are authorities in this area, so I'm going to tell you this is their ideas, so you'll respect it more.
Well, actually, it's all people, right? We all basically go to authority,
Well, to a point, but I mean even more so. He's, there's that specific notion of, when in doubt, guardians are going to appeal to who's the authority on this.
Yeah, right.
Yes. With artisans, actually, we have an instinct to do the opposite, and be like,
Yeah, but you have your
anti-authority.
you have your heroes, right? You have
Oh yeah,
you know
that's the thing is
Muhammad Ali.
the authority that artisans grant is when someone shows us the skills.
Right.
You know, they're extremely skilled at this. Okay, well, we respect that person that because they've shown they can do this,
Right.
not just they have a title or a status. You know.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And so, and of course, us rationals have our celebrities. You know, there's celebrity science.
So for artisans, does respect very much has to be earned?
Yeah,
I
I
think everybody has to.
Yeah.
I think everybody has. Respect has to be earned. The question is, how do they earn it? If you got a title, or if you've got a position, you've got experience. The Guardians suggest, that the rational, no, it's not. It's not experience. And it's the ideas.
Mm.
The ideas are right. You're good. The ideas are wrong, or it contradicts what you think it is. Then you're going to throw them out. Idealists is, if you're not getting with the, it's not congruent with the ideal, then you don't care, right? I mean, Martin Luther King didn't care what the world thought. He knew was right, and then of course the artisans, yes, basically you gotta show your chops. You got good chops, right?
I think to me, I see it sort of as two different things, and I don't know. This may be more on the the side of the entertainer artisans versus the operator, because I think I respect people as individuals inherently. Like I look at it as we're all just fellow travelers on the road of life.
Right.
And so I give a certain amount of respect just for people. Like I'm open-minded to you to present to me whatever you want to, and I don't look at you. I'm not looking down on you from the beginning.
Right.
But yeah, there's probably different methods of earning that respect to a higher point than that. Really granting the status of this person is an authority on something. You got to show me just more than being an individual. I'm going to respect your point of view as an individual, but as soon as you start telling me stuff and showing me something, if it, like you said, if it's going, opposite way of what I respect in terms of the point of view or what you've done, then that's going to make me, lose some of that respect. I'm still going to say you got to, your valid point of view as an individual. I don't put myself on a pedestal or a moral superiority, to anybody. And that's the thing, again, that flabbergasts the cooperator side when I say things like I don't believe there's such thing as a good or a bad person. There's good and bad actions, but people are just people. And that their minds are blown by that because they always classify people as good or bad. And so there's a split there. And I think rationals are probably closer to the way I'm looking at it, and because it's more about, like you said, the ideas. Are your ideas good or bad? As opposed to, are you a good or bad person? Was Einstein a good person or a bad? I mean, I don't think rationals care. It's more about were his ideas good.
Yeah, it depends though. If you're a rational that gets into, like, well, from my point of view, where you buy into the Aristotelian idea of your actions reveal your true character. By true character, then in terms of what they choose between in a certain situation, you can tell what they really value. It's like, for instance, if someone decides to do something where they don't go for the money and they stay loyal, then you can see, they had the choice to go for the money, but then, or if they did go for the money, so it's where the choice is clear, then you can work out their true character through their actions, and it's not just their image. And so you can get that in writing when you try to come up with these specific circumstances where you get the character to choose, so the audience can see character in action through their choices. A very carefully designed story.
Right. Of course, obviously that becomes very difficult in general because
Yeah.
you know, there's so many so many factors that people, you know, choose on, you know. So that's one aspect. But in general, yeah, I mean, that's what my father says, is don't. In fact, I just said it most recently. I said, don't judge people by their words, judge them by their actions. If you're going to judge them at all. And basically, what Jeff is saying is that they don't judge. The artisans don't judge until you cross them, or you take them down the wrong path. And so
that's probably one of the reasons I love soap operas, because they really are like sort of the playground of the artisan mentality. Because if you watch a soap opera in 20 years ago, and then you watch it now, it's still on the air, and half the characters, they're still there from 20 years ago, and all they've done, they've traded spouses, and they've traded, he's married to the sister of the one he was married to 20 years ago, and but they go in all these circles, but they end up in the same place, because nobody ever is really beyond reform, because they're all criminals. Like, I was watching General Hospital, and it's like the whole thing is about everyone's blackmailing each other. It's I won't tell anyone about the evil thing you did if you don't tell them about the evil thing I did, and they both keep each other's secret, but then it inevitably comes out, and they face consequences for it, but then they always weasel their way out of it, and then they get back into the exact same dynamic again.
Yeah, and I can't stand watching soap operas.
Well, I get tired of them. I'll get tired of them, but then I always go back to them, because there's always that appeal to me. And of course, as when I first started watching it, as a teenage boy, it was the hot women, that was the attraction. But then when I actually started watching it, I would get into the stories, because it was so easy to relate to those characters that were either they were like me. That's the thing, is they were like me in mentality, but they would get away with actions I couldn't get away with, and that's the fun of it, because you're like, these soap operas characters can do whatever they want, and nothing ever sticks to them. The same way a lot of politicians seem to be.
Right, exactly.
And so that's again, and politics probably appeals to me a lot for that same reason, because I can enjoy the theater, the competition, the horse race of politics, and enjoy how this, somebody like Newt Gingrich, we talked about earlier, can have so many strikes against him, and then he can still have a period of time, in 2012, where he was the polling first place, for the front runner for the Republican presidential nomination. And I'm like,
for 2 days.
Yeah, this guy's been disgraced so many times, but he's still there, because again, the politicians, it's like you can't get anything to stick. They're never permanently off the radar.
Yeah. Even Nixon, right? I mean, it's amazing that
Yeah, I mean, that guy, the New York guy, Anthony Weiner,
Right.
Oh yeah.
How many chances did they give him, to keep coming back, and and even Jon Stewart finally was like, I can't make any more excuses for this guy.
Yeah, and then of course you got like guys like the professional politician, right? Like Byrd, what's his name?
Robert Byrd.
Robert Byrd, right? He was
KKK.
KKK. He was Mr. Pork Barrel, but he had a lot of power, and people just wouldn't cross him because
all that's forgiven.
Oh, it's forgiven.
That's the funny thing about that, because Strom Thurmond, another one that was
Strom Thurmond, Byrd,
in the Senate for 50 years. He was, his whole platform back in the 40s was, we can't let the colored people have any power, And 50 years later, he's still in the Senate. And he's extremely popular, but he retires, and then Trent Lott's making a speech at his birthday party, and he says something about how the country would be better if he'd have been elected president. Trent Lott's career gets ruined by saying that, but Strom Thurmond can do no wrong. The guy that was actually the racist, everyone still loves him, but then Trent Lott says one thing, and his career's done.
And as it turns out, Strom Thurmond had a child that was a black girl.
Yeah.
It's
like they say that that the Thomas Jefferson supposedly had black kids and stuff, kids with his slaves or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that of course that's one of my hobby horses is judging people from 300, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
300 years ago.
Yeah, that's the thing that gets me, and it gets me how many, and I know a lot of it, is not the actual rationals, but some of them are. You talked earlier about, the religion and politics, and you've said yourself, science is your religion. The people that are so, adhering to that they have this idea that somehow we're living in the enlightened age, that, it's 2015, so what our consensus now is the enlightened one, and
I wish it was.
pity those poor people from the past, and those people that want to, go back to the past. Like in the in the 400s, they thought they were enlightened.
Yes.
They thought they knew everything then.
Yeah.
And so to me, just the arrogance of people to be like, oh, now we know now we know the right way. Now we know the way things should be. Now we really understand, and people give such credence to people like, Stephen Hawking. I don't have anything against that guy. He's obviously really smart. He does his research, whatever. But he's not God. He doesn't know everything. He doesn't know what the origin of the universe was.
Yeah.
He can speculate the way anybody else can. But
Yeah,
why
that's
they give him so much, up on the pedestal? Oh, Stephen Hawking issued the edict of here was the origin of the universe. He doesn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
somehow he's
I'm
the enlightened one.
I'm the one that knows, and Hawking's wrong. Dawkins is wrong. Well, luckily, most scientists, even though they'll say, we don't know what's going to happen, but they're pretty damn, it's the masterminds are the best on that. They say, I could be wrong, but I really doubt it.
Yeah, I saw a video actually by this guy that he said at the beginning of the video, I don't believe in God like as of a religion. I don't worship God. Whatever. Now let me explain to you. Now let me prove to you that God exists. So his whole premise from the beginning was, I don't have faith in this. Let me explain to you rationally how the proof of God. And then he proceeded to do that in like 15 minutes.
Yeah, well, apparently Gödel, had a proof for God. I don't buy it, but I'm thinking, God, if Gödel thinks that has a proof for God, oh my God.
Well, that was to me what was awesome about that, is because the first thing that a lot of people say when they're I won't say skeptical of religion, I'll say they're anti-religion, because there's a difference there. There's people that are just like, I know I don't know, and then there's people that are like on a crusade. Oh, the religious people must be stopped. And
you mean except they don't actually say that though. What they mean is the Christians must be stopped.
Well, but I mean,
well, no, theists.
Some of them discriminate. Some of them don't. Some are pretty much against all religions. Some of them do specify. I mean, I'm pretty sure that there's quite a few that are pretty anti-Muslim too, because that's been the one that gets the headlines more of the time. But the thing is, like, to me, I saw a thing like that, and I'm like, this guy is saying I don't know, but I'm going to, the typical thing is to say, well, religion, you have to like suspend your logic, or you can't look at it from a rational point of view, or you can't believe in a religion. And what that guy was saying was, here's what the logical case is for that. And I don't believe in it. So he was flipping the script, as they say, and saying, I'm not telling you I'm going to convince you of this because I want you to believe in something. I'm telling you I don't believe in it. Now here's why it's right from a rational point of view.
Okay, Jeff. You did. I'll ask you about personality later on, but you did. In fact, if you just tell me what you like about personality versus Baines, and then you can tell me about. Then if you tell me please about. You did this whole series of faith and type videos with people.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and excellent, Baines.
Cool. See,
color.
So, David, I think you said that there were typos in there and stuff.
Oh, there are so many typos, I can't believe it. Just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
I mean, I noticed some things. There's some paragraphs that the entire paragraph is repeated.
Yeah, no. What happened was my father he'd just come out of chemotherapy, and he's worried that he was going to die, and he wanted to get something out, and I said, okay, I'll I'll help you get it out. And I'm the worst editor in the world. And besides the fact that there's just so many. That's why we deep sixed it. Is besides the fact that it's very hard for most people. It just has so many errors, but the content is the best. I mean, actually, what Parsonology is he pulled out a bunch of stuff that people objected to, but it's a lot of the interesting stuff, like I don't know what I can't remember what he pulled out, but for example,
if you tell us what's in there that's not in Personology, because I've not got that book.
Okay. Well, I'd have to do that. For one thing, he's got the codes. We were for a while we were doing codes, but I gave up on the codes. So
you own codes.
Yeah, own codes. So there's TW. TW is the tactical coworker. TW. So you have two letters, to do 16 types, which is kind of cool, but. That's the problem with codes.
It didn't catch on as well.
Yeah, well,
I don't know what it is. What it is about the way that Myers did those letters, but for whatever reason, they're just easier to remember than any of the other letter codes.
Yeah.
I can't remember the socionics ones. I can't remember the ones in Brains and Careers, but the Myers-Briggs ones, just for some reason, they just flow better.
Well, because they've been around for 60 years now.
Well, obviously that's part of it,
years.
but even just in my knowledge of it, there's something about those particular combinations. Like we said, the consonants, it just sounds better. It's just easier. It clicks better for some reason.
Well, I think it's because there's two letters, right? EI.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have to remember
one or the other. Yeah.
Eight things and four functions, just like the temperaments, right? Artist and guardian, rational idealist, and those things, and Myers-Briggs, you can basically 4 chops, and you just have the dichotomy EI, NS, DF, and DJ. So and people just that's what they first learn. I mean, my father was the worst. Worse that he promoted my Isabel Myers, so that people don't realize that the descriptions of my father's, as opposed to Isabel's, her descriptions were, matrix form actually, in the beginning, and so they said, my father came up with the paragraphs or like his 16 descriptions.
Yeah, what's really funny is when you have somebody online who says, here's an example of the Keirsey stereotyping, and then they quote something that came out of Gifts Differing by Isabel Myers. Yeah. So it's not even, Keirsey never even said it. It was Myers, and they say, here's an example of this terrible Keirsey stereotyping.
Right.
And that's why I always ask them when somebody says that, I'm like, quote me the chapter, the page of a Keirsey, but tell me which book and what page you're talking about. And 98% of the time they can't do it because they didn't they didn't read the book. They don't know the page. They just saw it on some website and it was attributed that way, so that's what they think.
Right. Yeah, it's been a mix. It's all mixed up system. So yeah. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, you'll see websites where you look at and they'll have the temperaments, but they'll call them different names. It'll be like these are the structurers or the analysts or the but then you look at it and it'll be like the first paragraph may be original and then the next paragraph is exactly lifted from Keirsey books and then the next one is lifted from a different website. It's like, and it's all just cold together with no credit given.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
So back to my father. I should probably go through it. There's, well, I mean, we don't want to bore people like.
No, people love all this because mainly these videos are for the people in our group.
Right.
Well, we can.
They said that they would like to chop it up, so I don't know. Maybe we should
maybe
chop these things up.
Yeah, actually, like if you want to do, David could, take a look at that, and maybe we can revisit it in a different video.
Okay.
So basically, there's about probably a couple chapters worth that is pulled from Brains and Careers and the color diagrams, and but the basic stuff is both in personology and other.
And
What was pulled out? What sort of features?
Oh, so for example, I think the back part talking about it's like he compared Kretschmer and Meyer. What he did was he went to Kretschmer, got all the words that he would say about the four temperaments, right? Then go to Myers, pull those words from Myers, and then from Fromm and from I don't know the other guys, a bunch of guys, right?
yeah, personology kind of reads like a best of. It's like sort of streamlined the Please Understand Me books and Brains and Careers.
So it's in more detail than that because it's got all of the lists that the different personologists used.
Right. Okay.
In the beginning of that, so I think that's Kretschmer there.
Okay, so they still does that, but I think he goes in more details at the end. But yeah, maybe that.
This one has.
So, for example, he talks about the Kretschmer regrouping of Myers types. He talks about the four Jungian groups of typological types. He then talks about Myers 16 types sorted according to Jungian psychological functions. It's just footnotes. Talks about Hippocrates, Paracelsus, talks about Parkinson's law, phenomenology, thoughts and feelings, Pandora's box, the mind-body problem, tool usage. So I don't know whether that's all in there. So I really should dig it.
Ben, what were you going to ask me about the Faith and Type series?
It was just this idea that you seem to be negging a bit on the religious people, and then I thought, wait a minute, you've done a load of videos.
When was I negging on religious people?
Well, that's the general vibe I got.
Well, see, that's what you get when you go off vibes. instead of the words I actually say. I'm very, once again, back to the consonants thing, I'm very careful usually in the words I choose. Well, not always, but I try to be. I try to be specific. That's the thing. Again, there's references to this in those books about artisan language is more literal. It's more specific, except when they're lying to you. That was the great line from DJ R&D's video about ESFPs. I think the best thing he said in there was ESFPs are extremely literal. They say what they mean, unless they're lying to you.
Yeah.
And so that's the basic thing. Is nothing I said was.
Or how about changing it unless they're stretching the truth?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Finding that's another thing I thought was great about the Brains.
Reinventing themselves.
Yeah. The point that he made about artisans are not coming up with ideas from scratch. They're putting their own spin on things. They're taking these things that are established, and that's I do that so naturally where. Just hearing somebody says something in a certain way, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to say it the way I want to say it. I could direct quote someone. I could say, here's what they said, quote, and direct quote. But it's more fun to give my take on it, So that's what it's that putting the spin on it, making it sound better, making it sound more appealing, shifting it to the audience that you're speaking to. I did a thing, it was, 7th, 8th grade, where it was a sort of introduction to theater class type of thing, or speech class, along those lines. And we were, the concept was do some sort of a modern take on a fairy tale. So I did Jack and the Beanstalk. And so I had things like, it takes place in Harlem, and the Giants line is fee fi fo fum, I smell the blood of a New York bum. So there's an example, and I was 12 when I came up with that.
Yeah.
So it's a natural thing to take that and spin it into here's the audience, here's how I'm going to reshape this thing. the stuff, I talked about the soap operas. Soap operas have existed for as long as human entertainment has existed. They didn't call them that because that term came about much later. But the idea of setting up those same kind of dynamics and conflicts is way back because those performances. It's like putting on the show and taking real human dynamics and making a show out of them. It goes back all the way.
Yeah, what it is, it's almost like dramatized gossip. The things that people would gossip about.
Yep.
Is what's in a soap.
Yeah, and that the audience, once again you go back to it, is that the audience is still majority Guardian. So the Guardians with the gossip, it's always the funny thing is in soap opera fandom they refer to as the pearl clutchers because it's the idea the Guardians are watching this salacious stuff and clutching the pearls. The old ladies are going, "Oh, this is so terrible. Oh, I'm going to tune in tomorrow and watch it again," because that's their perspective. Is they're seeing this. This is what you don't do, but then they can't resist it. They can't resist gossiping about it. And like when I said earlier about the Charlie Sheen interview, everyone they were talking about it. It was about how crazy it was, but they were still talking about it because Guardians love to be entertained by artisans. They wouldn't know what to do without us.
Right. That's one thing that I still have a great difficult time with is horror films. I cannot really understand. It's just hard for me to fathom how people could watch horror films.
Well, part of it is if you take a date to the cinema, then they get closer to you because they're scared.
Yeah.
That's probably part of it. That's a good point he brings up because I don't like horror films in general, but the last time I remember considering going to one, I was meeting up with a particular girl, and the movie we were trying to see, like, she got stuck in traffic, so it was too late for us to see it, and the only available movie was the horror one, and I would have normally never on any other circumstances I would have never even considered seeing it, but because I was with her, I thought about it. We ended up going somewhere else, but but that was I entertained the possibility because of my company. But I think probably that's another one of those that's probably a little divided in terms of the thinking artisans or the operator artisans are probably a little more likely to have horror movies appeal to them. And it's not like across the board, but I think it's probably just sort of tendency that generally I don't go for the gory stuff. Now, violence itself, sure, there's plenty of violent things I like, but not the real gory stuff. That's not really what appeals to me.
Yeah.
So with horror, it's got to be more like the comedy horror type of thing, where it's really more campy and and it's the type of stuff like Sorority House Massacre, with let's see how many hot women we can put in the movie rather than it really being about let's see how gory we can be.
Yeah, that's what it's become.
And the producer, the writer of that movie, they knew exactly how to do it because it's about this it's sorority girls. They're killed off in their order of attractiveness. The most attractive girl is the last one to die.
Okay.
So it works perfectly because that's the one you want to stay tuned and see more of her, and she's the one that survives the longest. Yeah.
Okay. I can never watch that stuff, so I had no idea.
So Jeff, when you read I think is it pictorial words for the artisans?
Yeah.
Did that really
paint the
fit?
picture. Yeah, because it's always about describing stuff and painting the picture with words. That's there were a lot of good terms in that. I really, like I said, it became like a almost a performance piece in itself reading that because I'm like, this is so cool, to have somebody just be describing the way that I operate. It's but then that's the thing is, and I guess this shouldn't come as no surprise to Dave either, and I've probably told him this before, is that when I was younger, I wouldn't have accepted that because I would have been too suspicious and too stubborn. I would have said, no, that's not how I am, because I wouldn't want to grant the authority to this psychologist guy to be able to tell me how I am. I'm like, nah, you know, like he was saying in the other video, you know, I don't want to be put in a box. You can't type me, man. I'm outside of that, man. I'm my own person. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
You know. But once I got old enough, mature enough that I was able to admit, you know, I'm like, yeah, this this describes me really well. This is on target in so many ways, and it became a cool thing rather than just something that I had to fight against.
Right.
That instinct is still there, though. It always never goes away completely. I'm never going to completely like cede that to someone. I'm always going to be pointing out, here's how I'm different. You know.
Right. Yeah. And so my father, the reason he was so good at that is because, of course, he was an artist in the world in the beginning, and obviously he's in the school system that's a guardian world, and so you know he knew it down to the thing. So we have word usage. So we have the artisan, alive and kicking, any port and a storm, axe to grind, backstreet driver, bag of tricks, buy a pig and a poke. You know, so you know so these are probably you know 50s, 60s, but you know that people can come up with you know they're just constantly.
And then that's the thing though, is about the, you know, the fact that the words are old and the putting your own spin on stuff is the things we can bring back the old words. It happens all the time. Retro becomes popular, and it's just a different era that happens to be the one that comes into fruition. But my brother and I, my younger brother, who's a crafter artisan, we actually made a conscious effort when we were still in school to bring back old words from our childhood. Like when we were in high school, like these were the words we said when we were in 3rd or 4th grade. Let's make them popular again. So we started saying some of those phrases and like bring them back into the vernacular of people, with them not even really realizing why we were doing that. But it was like this, and so again, you can take the old stuff and make it new again by just bringing it back into favor for whatever reason. And that's the funny part when you have modern stuff where they start using really old words. Like I was talking with some of my coworkers about the word salty has become a popular thing for younger people to say. You know, now I see it online and stuff. Yeah, it goes back. It's like an old, you know, like
that's my father's generation.
Exactly. Yeah, but now sometimes those words will come back, and the kids don't even know where it came from. They just know that people say it and they repeat it, but they don't realize it's old.
Yeah. Yeah,
so you know, maybe people will start talking about pigs in a poke again. You know. Pigs in a poke.
Well, I think one word that has not changed. Cool.
Yeah, that's been around a long time.
A long time, since the 50s. Actually the late 40s is when it started, I think.
It's a great thing. Like I've listened to the old the original Superman radio show from the 40s. And the commercials are still in there on some of the broadcasts, and they're great to listen to because you hear those words of how they talked then, and the way they did that spinning of the, you know, and so the sponsor for Superman at one point for a while was the cereal Kellogg's Pep, and so the announcer says, "Get Hep to Pep." That's like the tagline, you know, and. Yeah, like most people, you know, and now they'd be listening to that and going, "What is he talking about? Hep? What does that even mean?" Okay, I got to ask you, Ben. This is your technical question because you've used the mobile version of Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do I log out? I can't find it anywhere.
How do you log out?
Because the PlayStation version is like the mobile version.
Have you got like a little hamburger menu?
Hamburger menu.
Where it's 3 horizontal lines.
3 horizontal. Oh yeah. Is that it? It's under there. It's not responding, man. It doesn't really matter that much. I just figured I'd ask you. Maybe I had a chance.
I think because I can open it on my.
So the 3 horizontal lines thing, that's where the logout is, though?
Yeah, I think once you click on there should be a whole menu of things under there.
Well, I clicked it a bunch of times, so we'll see if it shows up eventually. But otherwise, I'll just quit. But it's not really that important to log out. But oh, I think it might have appeared. Scott.
Hey Jeff, this is the first time you talk to Dave in a Hangout.
Yeah, it is.
Surely there are questions bubbling away that you've had. There is the chance.
Well, we know each other for, I'm thinking,
Right,
maybe
6 or 7 years, yeah.
6, 7, 10, might have been even 10. Well, let's see.
It was really like 2008 was when I really started to get into the online personality type world.
Okay.
It was probably like late in 08, I'm guessing.
In 08, yeah. That's when I created the forum.
Yeah, and that was the first, like even before the forum, there was that sort of, I don't know if it was a blog but it was basically, it had a comment section. So it was like those of us who made up the forum members, we started in that comment section, conversing in there, and then the forum came about after that. So,
I mean, I would say that Jeff is YouTube's biggest Keirsey promoter and defender, and so
that's probably true because the ones that have done videos about Keirsey, they've been kind of very clinical. Like, here's what they say, and then that's it. And there's one pretty funny one. I don't know who the guy is. God bless him. He's this old guy with a mustache, but he's got to be one of the most boring presenters. And to hear him talk about like the artisan performer, and he's reading in this monotone voice, like, the artisan performer wants to make excitement wherever he goes. And I'm like, so in other words, the opposite of what you're doing.
there was this woman talking about the temperaments in front of a class, and she was very funny. I can't remember, what is her name? There was this one lady and she was talking about artisans are good in the crisis, and then she says, I like to think that the artisans actually caused the crisis in the first place. And she had...
Yeah, great crises. Yeah, no, unfortunately, that's the disadvantage of being quote-unquote famous, is that a lot of people attribute everything to you, right? And the things you don't really want to be attributed to. And so, I mean, that he was not that interested in the internet per se. I mean, he was supportive of me, but he couldn't he couldn't handle. He was not very technical in the computers. Even though I showed him computers a long time ago, but he never attained the expertise.
Yeah, the YouTube, the majority of the YouTube videos that cover Keirsey or Myers-Briggs from the Artisan Guardians, what they are is that person has a channel.
Right.
And they do one video about that because they took a test online. And they say, oh, I took this test. Here's what it says. Here's the description. And take this test too and tell me in the comments what you got. And then the next video is something completely different, and they never come back to it.
Right.
So it's not the focus of their channel at all. It's just like, well, it's a little dalliance and,
Yeah.
I mean, even someone like EJ&D who knows a lot about typology, he would say something like, Keirsey is just I versus E, M versus S, T versus S, J versus P. That's what it said. Yeah. Wait a minute. What about abstract, concrete, cooperative?
He's all over the place.
Yeah.
He's just the typical example of his motivation is not to educate people. He's a promoter. He's promoting himself the way he wants to. Oh. He's not trying to make people learn things. He might try. He might say he is, but that's really not what he's motivated by.
Yeah, and there's one really good video out there on this channel called Typerific by this chick. But see, the thing is, she does a fantastic explanation of the Keirsey system, but she pronounces it artesian.
Yeah. Oh, artesian, yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few creative pronunciations of.
She does. It's very good. It's like she does all the abstract concrete. She does all these. It's a very good explanation. I think it's Typerific. I'll try and get you the link.
Okay. Yeah. I don't want to. The problem is, I don't. It's like, like when I occasionally run across type celebrities, and I'm like, oh God. You know, it's like, oh, you know, can I take my name? Can we take our names off these things? You know, it's like, you know, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe some of the typings that people do.
Oh yeah. Right. So let's have a look. It is. Her name is, just so people know, it is. So yeah, Typewithic. So if people put in Typewithic and don't put the E, and just put TYPRIFIC, Keirsey personality test, they'll find her video.
Okay, I don't know whether I can stand it.
Okay.
There's several where immediately my cynicism like rises to the surface immediately, because you have the ones that they're trying to sell their version of type.
Right.
And that's their whole purpose is that, they might have some stuff in there that's spot on in terms of about types, but their whole focus is, okay, but we know all this stuff, so buy our book, buy this, buy that. It's the whole thing is a sales pitch rather than it is trying to understand people or anything like that.
No, she's just this good-looking chick, like an ENFJ type chick who usually does other videos, and she's got loads of insincere and FE, which is sort of how I tell the difference between an ESFJ and an ENFJ.
Yeah, I think I've seen her before. Doesn't she do she does a lot of videos about things like makeup and clothes and stuff like that?
Yeah, but this is like really well, because like she puts lots of annotations on and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just a good video that explains.
The funny thing was, though, the very first time she did one about the type, she claimed she was an INTJ. And once again, shows how you can take a test and it's not necessarily going to reflect your actual type.
Yeah. She's an INTJ. She must have had a lot of training.
Yeah, later on, she did another video where she basically, admitted that she's not an INTJ. But again, it's like she had initially, like a lot of people, her first experience was, I took a test and it said INTJ, so that's what I am.
Right.
That generally the reaction on taking a type test online is one of two things. It's either, oh yeah, this is so true about me, or it's exactly the opposite. No, this is a bunch of crap, and then they never think about it again.
Right.
It's one way or the other.
Right.
And it's if you think about it, like you were saying about ideology and all that, it's the same way with things like horoscopes and all of those different things. It's like if someone is sort of in the mind, the
right.
Confirmation bias, then you hear that where it's like they've already convinced I'm this kind of thing, and oh yeah, this is so true. This is exactly how I see myself. Right. Or there's the opposite way where they're just in the mindset of I'm against whatever they say I am. I'm not that. They're gonna and I admitted on one of my first videos that I did that my very first experience with a personality test was the original Keirsey temperament sorter in the original Please Understand Me book, and it was given to me by my mother when I was 19 or 20 years old. And so my initial thought, because she made the mistake, she made two mistakes. It's like here we go, full circle all the way back to Monty Python, and we started talking about the big cheese made two mistakes. Number one, she told me she had an idea of what type she thought I was. And number two, she left the book in a room and said, I'm going out somewhere, don't read the book, like don't try to cheat and read the book before you're done this test. So of course, I did two things. I tried to read as much of the book as I could while she was gone, and two, when I took the test, I was not honest about it. I tried to screw with it because I was trying to not end up the type she thought I was. And if you look back on that, when I made my video, it was kind of like one of my intros because I was talking about the essence of artisans and our mentality, and I was like, if someone had knowledgeable temperament had observed me doing these things, they would have right then said he's artisan, no matter what the test says, no matter what, because every single thing that I did, it betrayed that. My mentality of the whole thing was not about, oh, I'd like my mother to understand me better. No, it was, I'm not going to be what she thinks I am. No, screw that.
Actually,
I'm going to do something else.
Actually, the inventor rational, the INTP, would do the same thing.
Yeah, okay, but again, they'd have a different reason for doing it.
They have different reason, but the same. They're trying to screw with you, trying to chip you up.
Yeah.
Did you find the video? Did you find the video, Dave? The typerific?
No, I haven't looked for it yet.
Because it can be watched without the sound on.